and back then there wasn't much you could do to entertain each other than play these little games. One of them I well remember was called Spin the Bottle. And it so happened that we were in a circle, and the boys had to be in a circle, and if the girls spun the bottle, or whatever boy it pointed to, they got to go behind the door and get a kiss. Well, it was my thrill and Wanda's thrill that when she spun the bottle, it pointed toward me, and she and I had the big thrill by going behind the door, and I received the kiss.
I just can remember she was so dramatic about everything. Even when she talked to you, she was so dramatic. And she was always, if there's any kind of school play, she was in it, and she participated in it and all this, and so that was what I remember. But I do remember after she became an actress that one of our football games is she did return to Jacksonville, and I remember her walking across the field at the stadium waving at everybody.
I don't think Wanda stayed in Jacksonville too long after she realized that she had real commercial talent. She moved on, and you know, she went out to Hollywood and married Audie Murphy, the World War II hero. I don't know how long their marriage lasted, but they were briefly married anyway. And she was an extremely talented girl. It was a shame that her career never got the big boost and the big publicity and all that her husband's career got.
And when Elvis came to town, we got just as excited as the rest of the country.
When Elvis Presley was in his prime, he put on a show out at the Gator Bowl, packed the Gator Bowl. And after the show was over, my daughter was headed for home, and they called some other people. And as they came down Adams Street, they saw him, Elvis, standing in front of the Roosevelt Hotel. May have been the Carling then. And they slammed on the brakes and got out the car and rushed over to join the crowd. And he turned around to see what it was and stepped right on her foot. And her shoe stayed on my mantle for the next 6 months. She wouldn't let me take it down. And I don't know whatever happened to the shoe. It'd be valuable now, wouldn't it?
There was a glittering row of movie theaters along Forsyth Street between Main and Adams, and just walking along there was a kind of big town excitement for people in from the countryside.
All the big theaters were downtown in those days, you know, the movie theaters, and that was quite a drawing card too, because we used to take the all of our entertainment just about it was downtown.
The Florida Theater, the Palace, the Imperial, and the Ritz in La Villa on Davis Street were among the most popular.
Palace Theater used to have vaudeville come through. And my mother and daddy one night decided to go. See, I got to go all these places I should have had to go because I was the only child at home. They couldn't leave me alone. And they sang a song about the spearmen on the bedpost overnight, you know. And my mother about fainted. She says, "What are you doing bringing that child in here to see this kind of thing?" And I looked around and said, "What?"
I enjoyed going to the Palace Theater because we had vaudeville. To us, that was just a normal thing of the day. You went to a movie, and as the movie closed, then the vaudeville act would come on. There were all kind of acts. There were jugglers, there were dancers, everything that could possibly become acting and all like that was on there all the time. It was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even as a child, that was a big event of my life, to go downtown to the Palace Theater and see that.
I had a job. I'd just gotten out of high school doing the depression, we not only had depression, we had the Florida boom broke. And I was lucky to have a job that paid me $5 a week. And somebody asked me if I wanted to work at the theater on the weekend. So I took a job ushering at the Palace Theater and made $5 for a weekend. I was in the money then. I had $10 a week coming in. Then I moved over to the Imperial Theater because the manager of the Imperial Theater found out that I could type. So after they closed the theater, I had to stay there and type up his weekly report that he sent down to the Sparks Theater down in Lakeland. And Lord, I wouldn't get through sometimes till 3 o'clock in the morning. But they paid me $10 a week. And sent me home in a taxi cab. That was big stuff then.
I can remember when we would go to the Imperial Theater and the other theaters downtown on dates. And I can remember all the movies were, of the older movies, the real great stars. And the ushers, they would usher you down the aisle and seat you. They all had uniforms, usher uniforms. And it was just so different. It was just a different time, and just wonderful memories. And I remember the carpeting was so beautiful. And I just can't describe it. It was so different than it is today.
The thing to do if you were young and had a date was to take her to the Florida Theater. That was really a beautiful place. And had a great organist there, put on a show. The Florida Theater was where we all headed.
The Florida Theater was just a beautiful theater. It was the #1 theater in Jacksonville, and everyone went there. When they had, when Gone with the Wind came, that was where they showed that movie, at the Florida Theater. And the lines were just so long. And the theater was just beautiful. It had a balcony.
The Florida Theater was a joy. There we saw not only movies, but plays. And the thing that I remember vividly is the organ. They had a beautiful organ in there, and the man who played it was a very good organist. They had vaudevilles in there. We got to see all sorts of things we wouldn't have seen had it not been for the Florida Theater.
Jacksonville movie mogul Louis T. Finsky changed the way America enjoyed the movies by introducing the concept of providing fresh popcorn and soft drinks to moviegoers at the Florida Theater here during the Great Depression.
My first day of work at the Florida Theater was July 9th, 1949. It was a Saturday. I felt as if I had to really dress up to go to work. I wore heels and my best dress and was just feeling good. During the evening, my feet hurt so bad I had to pull my shoes off. Mr. Heekin, the manager, or Mr. Cornwall, the assistant manager, came by, did a double take at looking at me, and I was embarrassed, and all of a sudden he says, "Uh-oh, Anita has shrunk since she has been to work here." It broke me up, and I felt a little bit better about leaving my shoes off.
The Florida Theater was just the place to go. And everyone was always dressed up. They had a dress code. You had to dress a certain way to go downtown. And you never saw anyone, the ladies, in slacks or shorts. They wore dressy dresses and heels, gloves, hats.
We were the first theater to get popcorn. It was in big bags that we put into warmers. Jack Ray, an usher, had been asked to come and sell the popcorn. One evening, he and I had a good time eating popcorn. Jack got so sick he was almost turning green. Mr. Heekin came over and very nicely asked Jack, "How's the popcorn?" Jack straightened up and said, "I don't know, Mr. Heekin." And he said, "Why don't you test it and see?" So Jack took a couple of popcorn, put it in his mouth, and he says, "Say fine." Mr. Heekin says, "Oh no, you have to taste more than that," and he made him take a big handful. Jack, of course, ate it very carefully, and he said, "It's still fine, Mr. Heekin." So Mr. Heekin said, "Fine, taste it every now and then to make sure that it's all right." And he said, "Yes, sir." He looked at Mr. Heekin, walked off. Jack looked at me and says, "I'll never eat popcorn again as long as I live." He never did while he was working at the theater, and I don't think I did either, but we still enjoyed it very much.
The Roxy Theater was between, on Forsyth Street, between Hogan and Laura, I think, up near the Aragon Hotel. And it really was not a very nice theater. And you weren't allowed in unless you were 18. So, of course, you know how it is. A few of us got in anyway. And I'll tell you the truth, I didn't understand too much about what was going on. But I did hear some things that astounded me, I'll tell you that.
Forsyth Street from Main to Noonan was Jacksonville's movie row. A hot spot of glittering lights, music, and entertainment in the days before television, and maybe even radio. Scenes like these may haunt us with their images of a kind of fun and frolic that has literally gone with the wind and the waves. But there were other kinds of ghosts that gave people here the spooks only yesterday.
A lot of people very devoutly believe that the King House and other places are haunted.
Stay with us for more about the ghost house at Mayport. Is it or isn't it haunted?
The last king that lived there, John King, claimed that the house was haunted, and he would take people through the house. There was a lady that apparently would appear at the top of the stairs all the time. A number of people have seen her.
Clara King was about my age. She was a very good friend of mine, and often I have been in that house. Great big rambling house that faces the St. Johns River. We enjoyed rambling over the house, never realizing that one day it would be called the haunted house. Her brother John lived in that house, and I'm not sure. I had the feeling that John enjoyed a little drama and perhaps added a few little things that happened at the house. But he truly believed it was haunted, and many people still believe it's haunted. The old house is still there at Mayport.
Everyone believes that that the house is haunted. There's been studies by, the man from, I think, Duke University, I believe, has been there. There have been others that have gone to the King House, done studies on it.
Most people remember the King House for the ghost events that have happened in that house. Not all talk. There was a parapsychologist by the name of Dr. Joyner from Duke University who investigated the house. One of the things I saw that perhaps you'd be interested in was we were sitting in a room with a huge oak door. There were 4 or 5 people in there, and the night was very still. One door led to the outside, and this door opened by itself, just long enough for someone to get in there, and then it closed by itself. There was not one breath of air any place that would lead to a door opening and closing, especially not a heavy oak door. And there were many, many times that you'd be sitting in a room and the doorknobs would turn, seen by any number of people. I don't want to sound very eccentric on this, but there were a number of people that saw these things. I wouldn't want the house to be remembered strictly as a ghost house. I would rather it be remembered as a beautiful, gracious home that was loved by its owners and where everybody always had a wonderful time with their friends and the family.
Traveling about and around Jacksonville has always been a source of pleasure and entertainment. 100 years ago, during the steamboat era, Jacksonville was the tourist center of Florida. And one of the places the tourists liked to visit was beautiful Mandarin on the St. Johns River. Mandarin has been a jewel in our firmament since earliest times, famous as the winter home of Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, of whom our great Civil War President Abraham Lincoln said on meeting her, "So you're the little lady whose book started this war." That was a long, long time ago. But it was only yesterday when people took their youngsters to Mandarin to ride a miniature train located at State Road 13 and Mandarin Road.
The miniature train was a little train built by a gentleman who loved trains and enjoyed children coming out to ride the train. We rode the train many, many times. It didn't last too long, but while it was there, everyone rode the train, the little train at the end of the line, we called it.
That was one of the delights of our children's childhood, especially our little boy. He used to, our big boy now, but he used to love to ride the little miniature train, and he would try to persuade us on weekends to take him out, and we would, and he and the girls would ride the train sometimes for hours, you know. We used to think we'd never get them home. It would have to be nearly dark before we could ever get them off the train. The little train was lots of fun.
We used to ride out there from town. We lived in the Riverside then. Right. And the kids would get on, and the people would sit on, some of the parents, you know, and they would hold on to the post, and the older fellas, you know, would hold on the post and just ride along. We were always afraid they were going to hurt themselves, going to fall or whatever, but nothing ever happened like that.
Everybody would take the kids out there and let them ride that train on Sunday afternoon. It was great. You saw everybody you knew, you know. And I know they took me out many a time to ride the train.
Our little boy, our big boy now, used to want to have a railroader's cap on, and I remember that one birthday, that was one thing he wanted. He wanted a red bandana and a engineer's cap for that train so he could ride that train.
He said he was retiring, and I went by there to see him and talked to him. He said, I could have bought that whole train and track for $500, and if I'd have been a mechanic of any sort, I would have gone ahead and taken it, but I didn't know how to work on the train if something went wrong with it. So I showed the path, but I tried to get a couple of people to buy it and keep it going, because it was quite a thing for Mandarin.
Another popular Mandarin spot right near the train was Joe Curry's Market, where men came to talk politics and housewives bought meat cut to order.
Joe Curry's Market was really an extremely interesting place. It became almost a Southside Mandarin special institution. This was because Joe himself was such a wonderful person. He was extremely active in politics and deeply interested in politics. And the gentleman used to love to go and visit his market and talk to Joe about politics. And he would discuss them for hours on end. It was a fascinating place. We used to love to go there.
Some people named Flynn had a little small grocery store on the corner of Mandarin Road and State Road 13 for years. And they finally put up a new store. And within 6 months, they sold to Joe Curry, who opened his really a fancy meat market, and people came from all over Jacksonville to buy Joe's meats.
He was a very unusual man. He was a man of great integrity. He was very smart. He was a man of determination. He wanted to see the very best of everything for Mandarin, and he wanted people to recognize the importance of Mandarin. And he worked tirelessly for that. And that was one of the things that made him so interesting to us. I remember that my husband and used to often go shopping with me just because he enjoyed talking to Joe at Joe's Market.
He ran a credit tab for groceries for all the poor in the area. He would write them off sometimes. He gave a lot of things to the community.
Joe was very proud of his market, and he had delicious, high-quality meats. And he used to really take a great pride in the fact that he was furnishing people in Jacksonville a very superior type of meat. A great many people came from all over the city and even the beaches to buy at Curry's Market because of the meat quality.
Joe, to show his appreciation for his growing business that he had, started having a Christmas party in his store, which later became wasn't quite as large as a cocktail party at the Georgia-Florida game, but it was almost. And people from all over Jacksonville started coming to Joe's party. One thing I always remember was the guy was an electrician, and his wife got pretty loaded, and the electrician didn't want to leave, so Joe said, well, and she was kind of falling a little bit, so Joe brought a grocery cart up, and he put her in the grocery cart and rolled out to the front door and said, when you're ready to leave, call me and I'll help you get in the car. So I wish I'd had a picture of that one, because she was feet straight up in her head. They had a pig, a pet pig, and they'd bring that Christmas party. They'd take that, after the party got roaring a little bit, they'd bring that pet pig in and turn him loose. And he'd run up down those aisles, and people were about half loaded. They'd knock their feet right out from under them. So they were chasing that pig all over Joe's Market. He was just quite a guy. He was one of the first real merchants that ever came to Mandarin. And it was a shame to see supermarkets came in and kind of did him in, so.
He used to get very excited about things, and he would think that people were ignoring, you know, the opinion of the people in Mandarin, and he would get very excited about that. And he was, but he was, in spite of being a man who became enthusiastic and excited, he was sort of a laid-back individual, if you know what I mean. Yeah. He was, he took things in stride, and his attitude was, well, you can't win them all. We lost this one, we'll win the next one, you know.
One of the things that characterized Jacksonville only yesterday was its bustling downtown, filled with shops and eating places of all kinds, and great department stores like Cohen Brothers, Ivy's, Sears, Levy's, and of course, Rosenblum's.
The downtown department stores, of course, were very high quality, high class. And I remember how excited we got when Rosenblum came in. That was had been strictly I think, men's furnishings, and then they expanded and became a general clothing store for men and women. And I remember how excited I was about that, because they had beautiful women's clothes, too.
Levy's was I would say, one of our most elite stores in Jacksonville. A store where we went to buy real nice things, and where at Christmas time they had the windows decorated beautifully with scenes, Christmas scenes. Always we loved to go to Levy's.
Originally, Cohen's had been down on Bay Street, went through Bay Street, and then it moved to the new store. Well, everybody thought that was the only place in the world to shop. And they had a floor walker there who everybody noticed him too, because his toupee was different colors. Well, it was the only place I ever saw where the children had their hair cut on the animals from a carousel. And you would pick the horse or the whatever it was you wanted to sit on, and then they would come and cut your hair there. And that was something special. So we never had little boys and girls hooping and hollering, because they were always glad to get up on the little animals.
During Christmas, all the stores were just decorated beautifully. And I remember it was Cohen Brothers. And, oh, it was just a beautiful place.
Jacksonville celebrated the end of World War II with an exciting Florida-Georgia football game in 1945, when a fellow named Charlie Trippi, fresh from the Army Air Corps, scored 3 touchdowns to lead the Bulldogs to a 34-0 victory over the Gators before 21,000 screaming fans. And even that far back, college football had become a local institution.
Well, let me just say the first college game I ever saw was in 1942. We got in the stadium one way or the other, and in came these big football players dressed in red and black, and it was the Georgia Bulldogs. They defeated Florida 75-0. And they interviewed the Florida coach after the game. His name was Tom Lieb. And his only comment was, well, if my defense hadn't been so good, they'd have beat me 150-0. The first college game, according to my records I can remember, was Florida and George Washington. Florida defeated George Washington. And that same year, Old Duval, we call it Old Duval, they call it Duval High Tigers, defeated Boys High 33-0. See, Duval was a 1921 National High School champs. And then they, and that's the year that WJX was opened. It was quite a history as far as Jacksonville, Florida was concerned. That same year, Leon, which is still in existence, Leon High of Tallahassee came over, and I think they were defeated 6-0 in the Gator Bowl. And that's the early memories that I can remember reading about the Gator Bowl, because we did call it Fairfield Municipal Stadium, and then later on it was called the Jacksonville Municipal Stadium.
Now, the old Gator Bowl, that was the world's worst. That was where I went the day I got the shad fish. But the seats that you could afford to buy, you faced the west into the sunshine. And that's always where I had to sit. I was so aggravated with that. But it was a fine old Gator Bowl. We had the Florida-Georgia games there. And it was wonderful.
Now, the first Gator Bowl game actually was played in 1946, and that was Wake Forest in South Carolina. And that was when the old stadium ran the other way, and they brought these teams, and Wake Forest defeated South Carolina. We thought Florida was going to play in the bowl game that year, but according to well as I remember, Florida had just fired their coach, head coach Tom Lieb, and Florida could not accept the invitation because they didn't have a head coach. You could buy your tickets at Donaldson's. I think the general admission was $1.50 to get in the old stadium.
Did you know that one of Jacksonville's most popular restaurants and its proprietor was featured in Ripley's Believe It or Not? And that people came from all over the country just to dine there. Do you know who the famous man in green was?
I really always enjoyed eating with the man in green. He was quite a famous character.
If you don't remember, just stay tuned for people who do.
Bernie always wore green himself. He wore a green suit, green tie, and he always stood right inside the door during the rush hours, during the lunch hours or the evening hours, and he greeted everybody, he was very much the cordial host, you know, and he was a charming man. He had a great deal of personality, and his restaurant was a